All right, let's jump into this creative deep dive today. We're taking a look at Austin Kleon's Steal Like an Artist. Have you heard of it?
Oh, yeah, it's a classic.
It is, right? And it's for anybody, I think. If you're feeling a little bit intimidated by this whole concept of creativity, if you're like, I don't know, I'm not an artist, but everybody's got that spark in them.
Right.
So Kleon throws this idea out that might seem kind of crazy at first. He says, every artist, when asked, where do you get your ideas, should answer, I steal them.
Hmm.
What do you think about that? Is that just being provocative or?
At first glance, it does seem a little provocative. But I think the point he's trying to make is that nothing is truly original. And everything that we do creatively is building on what came before us.
So it's not about just ripping somebody off. It's about being inspired and, like you said,
Yeah.
taking the pressure off of this idea that you got to come up with something brand new.
Exactly, yeah. I think it's very freeing to think that way. Because we all have influences, whether we realize it or not.
So how do we figure out where that line is between, inspiration and just outright imitation?
Well, he talks about the genealogy of ideas. And he says to think of it like a family tree.
Okay.
We all have our own genealogy of ideas that comes from everything that we let into our lives. Books, music, the people that we talk to.
Experiences.
Our experiences, exactly.
It's like a web of things.
Yeah, it's a vast network of inspiration.
I love that idea. He also uses this example of two lines, right? And how they create this third line, the negative space between
Yeah,
them.
1 + 1 = 3 concept.
Plus 1, 3, yeah. So two ideas can come together and create something totally new.
Exactly, and that's where innovation really happens.
Oh, I like that. But he goes on to say, start copying what you love. Copy, 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 copy. Now, isn't that how do we square that with, plagiarism?
Right, and that's a really important distinction to make. Plagiarism is passing off somebody else's work as your own. But when Kleon is talking about copying, he's talking about it as a learning process.
Oh.
Think of it as reverse engineering. The skills of people that you admire.
Okay, yeah. So not trying to pass it off as your own, but just trying to understand how it works.
Exactly, it's like looking at a blueprint
Hmm.
to see how a masterpiece was made.
And he even talks about how the Beatles, right? They started as a cover band.
Yeah, they were just playing other people's music.
Soaking it all in.
Exactly, and that's how they learn. It's not about becoming a clone of your heroes, but absorbing their thinking process.
Oh, that's good. So it's like through that process, you start to figure out your own style.
Right, you find your own style through the gaps, the places where your copy falls short.
There's that great Kobe Bryant quote, too, from the book,
Yeah.
where he's talking about how, he learned all of his moves from other players. And it's not about creating this brand new thing. It's about taking what's there and then, like you said, making it your own.
Yeah, and I love that quote because he says, there isn't a move that's a new move.
Right.
It's all been done before, but it's how you put it together
How you combine it. Yeah.
that makes it unique.
And that leads into this other concept that Kleon talks about stealing time for creativity. And he's talking about how important it is to have side projects, hobbies, that sort of thing.
Yeah, he really emphasizes that.
And, a lot of times people think, well, that's just, messing around, goofing off. But he's saying that that's where a lot of the good stuff comes from.
Right, because there's no pressure
Okay.
when you're working on a side project. You're free to experiment, to play, and that's where those breakthroughs can happen.
I love that idea of a playground, where you can just try things out. But then he says something else that I thought was so interesting. He says, take time to be bored. And in our world, we're constantly bombarded.
Right, constantly stimulated.
So how is boredom even possible?
Well, I think that's part of the problem. We're so used to being constantly stimulated that we don't give our minds the space to wander.
Interesting.
And that's where boredom comes in. It's the entry point to daydreaming, to letting our minds make those unexpected connections.
So that's where the magic happens.
Exactly, when we allow ourselves to be bored.
Huh. Now, he has this other piece of advice that might sound a little bit harsh at first. He says, don't worry about people stealing your ideas. If your ideas are any good, you'll have to ram them down people's throats. Is he being serious?
I think he is being serious, and it's about focus.
Okay.
Instead of worrying about being copied, he's saying, put that energy into making your work so good that people can't ignore it.
So it's about confidence.
Yeah, and the quality of the work.
But then he also talks about generosity. Answer questions, solve problems. Publicly admire work that you love. Why? if you're not getting anything back?
Right. Well, he believes in building community,
Yeah.
contributing to the creative ecosystem.
Okay.
And he says the energy that you put out, you attract back. His
Interesting.
generosity is magnetic.
I like that, yeah.
And also, when you explain something to somebody else, it deepens your own understanding.
Ah, that's true. All right, this has been fantastic. Before we go any further, let's recap the 10 key takeaways from Steal Like an Artist.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll be right back with more from this insightful guide to unlocking your creative potential.
Sounds good. All right, welcome back. Let's keep going with Steal Like an Artist.
Okay, cool. So one of the things that really jumped out at me was his emphasis on using your hands, like actually stepping away from the computer.
Oh, yeah, he's a big believer in analog tools.
It seems kind of counterintuitive these days, right?
It does, but I think he makes a good point. He says that while computers are great for editing and sharing your work, the initial stage of ideation can sometimes be hindered by technology.
Interesting.
He suggests having two distinct workspaces, one analog and one digital, to create this kind of dynamic interplay between generating ideas and then refining them.
So it's about engaging different parts of your brain.
Exactly. It's about tapping into that tactile experience and letting your hands lead the way.
It's funny because he also talks about this idea of schooling versus education.
Right. He's not a big fan of formal education.
Not in the traditional sense,
Yeah, he thinks it can be too limiting.
but he's all about lifelong learning.
Oh, absolutely. He's a voracious reader.
And he encourages people to just be curious
Yeah, to explore different avenues of knowledge.
and to Google their dreams and problems.
I love that advice.
It's so quirky.
It is, but it makes sense. Because you never know what you'll find.
Right, it's about following those rabbit trails,
Exactly. And he also talks about the importance of documentation.
like taking notes and keeping a swipe file,
Yeah, he calls it stealing from yourself.
which is an interesting way to think about it.
It is, because you're essentially curating a reservoir of ideas that you can draw upon later.
So it's like building your own personal library of inspiration.
Exactly. And he's a huge advocate for libraries in general.
Oh yeah, he loves getting lost in the stacks.
He says it's like a treasure hunt.
And you never know what gems you'll find.
And it's not just about finding specific books. It's about being surrounded by knowledge and letting your curiosity lead the way.
Okay, so let's talk about sharing your work with the world. Because I think a lot of people, especially when they're starting out, they're so eager to be discovered.
Right. They want to be the next big thing.
But Kleon has some interesting advice about that.
What does he say?
Well, he basically says that most of the world doesn't care about your work, which could be a tough pill to swallow.
It can, but it's also liberating in a way
How so?
because it takes the pressure off. You're free to experiment without the weight of expectation.
So you can just focus on the work itself.
Exactly. And that's when the magic happens.
So when you are ready to share your work, what does he suggest?
His advice is very simple. Do good work and share it.
Okay, that sounds straightforward enough.
It is, but it's also profound. Because he's saying that if your work is truly good, it will find its audience.
So you don't have to chase trends or anything like that?
No, just focus on the quality of what you're creating.
And he's also a big fan of using the internet to share your work
Oh, yeah. He sees it as a powerful tool for connection.
and for getting feedback.
Exactly. He even suggests sharing unfinished work online.
Really?
Yeah, he says it can be a valuable way to get feedback and refine your ideas.
That's interesting. I never thought about it that way. But what about negativity? The inevitable critics and haters.
He has some great advice for that, too.
What's that?
Don't worry about them.
Just ignore them.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
Focus your energy on the people who resonate with your work. And let the haters be haters.
Easier said than done sometimes, but I get it. So let's talk about the practicalities of living a creative life. Because Kleon also talks about the importance of routines.
Right. He debunks the myth of the tortured artist.
Okay, so no more starving in a garret.
No, he advocates for a balanced and sustainable approach to creativity.
So taking care of yourself, basically.
Exactly. Prioritizing your physical and mental well-being.
Which can be tough when you're passionate about your work.
It can be, but it's essential. He even suggests having a day job, at least in the early stages of your career.
That seems counterintuitive.
It does, but he sees it as a source of financial stability.
Which can then fuel your creative freedom.
Exactly, and it also provides a framework for establishing a routine.
Okay, that makes sense.
And he encourages people to find jobs that align with their interests.
So you're not just working for the sake of working.
Right, you're gaining valuable skills and experience that can inform your creative work.
It's all about finding that synergy, isn't it?
It is, and he also talks about the importance of your network.
The people you surround yourself with.
Yeah, he stresses the significance of having a supportive partner, inspiring mentors, and a community of peers.
Because you can't do it alone, right?
Exactly. We all need people to encourage us and challenge us.
He even says, marry well.
I love that
Me
advice.
too. And it's not just about romantic relationships.
Right. It's about the people you choose to collaborate with and befriend.
The people who believe in you and your vision,
Absolutely. And he also offers some practical tools for staying organized.
like using calendars and logbooks,
Yeah, he's a big believer in tracking your progress.
which can be really helpful when you're feeling lost or discouraged,
It can, and it also helps you celebrate your victories.
which is important too.
It is, because the creative journey is a marathon, not a sprint.
And there will be ups and downs along the way.
For sure, but it's about having the resilience to keep going.
And the passion to fuel your fire.
Exactly. And I think Kleon's book does a great job of capturing that spirit.
I agree. It's both inspiring and practical.
And it's a reminder that we all have the potential to be creative.
No matter what our chosen field is.
Exactly. And that's a really empowering message.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about one of the most thought-provoking ideas from the book, the concept of creativity as subtraction.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
Okay, so this idea that creativity is subtraction, it seems kind of backwards, right?
Yeah, it's a bit counterintuitive at first.
Because we always think about, adding more, doing more.
Or is better, right?
Right.
But Kleon is challenging that notion.
So what does he mean by creativity as subtraction?
Well, I think he's talking about the importance of simplifying, of getting rid of the clutter.
Both externally and internally.
Exactly.
So externally, that could mean, decluttering your workspace, getting rid of distractions.
Right. Anything that's taking up space.
Yeah.
And not serving a purpose.
And internally.
Internally, it's about letting go of those negative thoughts, those self-doubts and fears.
So it's like clearing out the mental cobwebs.
Exactly. Making space for the good stuff to come in.
Because if your mind is full of clutter, it's hard to be creative.
Right. You're not giving your ideas room to breathe.
So how do we actually do this? How do we subtract from our lives?
Well, it starts with awareness. Paying attention to what's weighing you down.
What's draining your energy?
Exactly. And then making a conscious effort to let it go.
So it's a process of letting go.
It is, and it's not always easy.
Especially when it comes to those internal barriers.
Yeah, those can be the toughest to break down.
Because they're so ingrained.
They are, but it's possible.
And it's worth it.
Absolutely, because when you clear out the clutter, you create space for something new to emerge.
That's a beautiful thought.
It is, and it's something that Kleon emphasizes throughout the book.
This has been such a fantastic deep dive into Steal Like an Artist. It's such a rich and inspiring book.
It is, and I think there's something in it for everyone.
Whether you're an artist or a writer, or just someone who wants to live a more creative life.
Exactly. It's all about tapping into that creative spark.
And letting it shine.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, we hope you enjoyed this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.